That could be the end of the season.
The circle, puts the shot in the air. Here's Michael shooting it over Miller, and he got it to go.
Michael Jordan had faced every kind of offensive player the NBA could produce. He had guarded giants, athletes built like freight trains, scorers who could pull up from anywhere on the floor. He was widely considered the greatest perimeter defender of his generation, a man who took it as a personal insult when an opponent scored on him in a big moment. But when a reporter pressed him in 1998 about the one player in the entire league he genuinely could not stand going up against, Jordan didn't name a physical monster or a championship rival. He named a skinny shooting guard from Indiana who weighed around 185 pounds and looked more like a distance runner than a basketball star. "Playing Reggie Miller drives me nuts," Jordan said. "It's like chicken fighting with a woman. His game is all this flopping type thing. He weighs only 185 pounds, so you have to be careful, don't touch him, or it's a foul. On offense, I use all my 215 pounds and just move him out. But he has his hands on you all the time, like a woman holding your waist. I just want to beat his hands off because it's illegal. It irritates me." So how does a player who irritated the greatest winner in NBA history become the most feared shooter of his era? How does a man that size, a man a single forearm could move off the ball, end up haunting the nightmares of the best defenders alive? The answer, as Jordan himself accidentally revealed, was never just the shooting stroke. It was never just the shooting stroke. To understand what Reggie Miller actually was, you have to go back to a driveway in Riverside, California, and meet the only person who ever truly had his number. Reggie Miller was born on August 24, 1965, in Riverside, and his first years gave almost no indication of what was coming. He entered the world with severe hip deformities and splayed feet that required leg braces. Doctors questioned whether he would walk without assistance. His family didn't spend those early years imagining an NBA future. They were watching a kid fight to move normally through a neighborhood where his siblings were already on a different athletic planet. His brother Daryl would go on to catch in Major League Baseball. His older sister Cheryl would become one of the greatest women's basketball players in history, a 1984 Olympic gold medalist, and a Hall of Famer who dominated every court she ever stood on. On the family driveway in Riverside, the hierarchy was brutal and completely clear. "I was physically bigger and better than him," Cheryl recalled years later. "So every time that he would come in the middle, I would send it back. And I would laugh about him and give him a hard time and say, all right, you sissy, this is where the big girls play." She would kill him by her own cheerful admission. So Reggie adapted. He stepped back further and further from the basket and developed a high arc, unorthodox release that had no business working on an NBA floor, except that it had to clear the tallest wingspan in the driveway before it had any chance of going in. "That's where my shot came from," Miller said later. "That's why it's unorthodox. It had to be to get it over her." Cheryl Miller built the weapon she spent years trying to block, and that is probably the most Reggie Miller sentence in existence. That shot went to UCLA, where Miller spent 4 seasons with the Bruins. The Indiana Pacers selected him 11th overall in the 1987 NBA draft. Pacers broadcaster Mark Boyle's first impression, later shared with a laugh, was that the guy looked like Mr. Potato Head on a stick. 6'7", roughly 185 pounds, unorthodox release, headed to Indiana. Not exactly the prototype for a franchise cornerstone. But inside that frame was a competitive ferocity that Cheryl had been sharpening for years, and a basketball mind that was already calculating angles most defenders weren't even aware existed. Miller spent his early seasons building toward something, and the something arrived in the form of the New York Knicks. Because those Knicks, physical, suffocating, built on the kind of defensive menace that was supposed to grind smaller, finesse-oriented players into submission, were exactly the opponent designed to neutralize what Miller was. Patrick Ewing owned the paint. John Starks played with the desperate intensity of a man who had clawed for everything he had. Charles Oakley was essentially a piece of road construction. Against this team, a 185-pound shooter from Indiana was supposed to be a seasonal inconvenience, a problem that went away when the calendar turned. Instead, he became their defining problem. The first flashpoint arrived on May 4, 1993, during Game 3 of their Eastern Conference first-round series. Miller did what Miller always did, found the edges of John Starks' patience, worked them methodically, and kept working them until Starks responded the only way his fury knew how. Starks headbutted him in the third quarter and was ejected. His own teammates were reportedly furious, Ewing and Oakley nearly confronting Starks on the court. Miller later admitted, "It didn't hurt. I was more in shock. But I was like, I'm gonna milk this. I'm gonna act like I just got hit by a tank." That was the second game Reggie Miller was always playing. The one the referees saw. The one the opponent had already lost before the ball went up. A year later, the rivalry produced something even more spectacular. The Eastern Conference Finals, June 1994, Game 5 at Madison Square Garden. Director Spike Lee was courtside. Spike Lee was always courtside for Knicks Pacers, and Miller absorbed every word Spike threw at him from the moment warm-ups ended, then went out and scored 25 of his 39 total points in the fourth quarter alone. After one enormous three-pointer, he turned toward Spike and made the choke sign at MSG. On national television. Herb Williams said afterward that if Spike had just sat there quietly, Miller might have missed his next 10 shots. Instead, the verbal duel turned Miller into something almost unreachable, a shooter who needed provocation the way other stars needed open looks. But nothing in his entire career compares to what happened the following year, May 7, 1995. Eastern Conference Semifinals, Game 1, with 18. 7 seconds left, the Pacers trailed the Knicks 105-99. The game was gone. Everyone in the building knew it. Mark Jackson inbounded and Miller caught the pass behind the arc and buried a three. Indiana down 3. Then Miller read Anthony Mason's inbound pass, stepped in front of it and stole it. Another 3-tie game. Starks got fouled and missed both free throws. Ewing grabbed the offensive rebound and missed. Miller got the ball, was fouled with 5 seconds left, and knocked down both free throws. Pacers 107, Knicks 105, 8 points, 8.9 seconds. John Starks sat on the bench and said out loud what every person in Madison Square Garden was processing. Man, did this dude just did this? Jeff Van Gundy called it the biggest meltdown he had ever witnessed in the NBA. It happened because Reggie Miller refused to acknowledge that any deficit was final until the clock hit 0 and the buzzer removed the possibility entirely. Patrick Ewing spent the better part of a decade watching moments exactly like that, and eventually gave his most complete summary of the problem. He was a great con man, Ewing said. He was always crying to the ref, running off, flopping. Knock you down, smack you, and act like he was the one getting smacked. I tell ya, I hated Reggie. That wasn't bitterness talking. That was genuine respect, translated through the only language a rival of Ewing's era would allow himself to use. You hated Reggie because he kept winning at a game that never appeared in the box score. Working officials, manufacturing contact, manufacturing fouls, manufacturing the psychological conditions under which elite players self-destructed. Which brings the story back to Michael Jordan in 1998. That Eastern Conference Finals went 7 games. But in Game 4, on May 25th, with the Pacers trailing and the clock nearly gone, Miller freed himself from Jordan's coverage and hit a three-pointer with 7 seconds left to win it. He later acknowledged a light push-off on the move. He also acknowledged that he did not regret it. The Bulls won the series and the championship that summer. But Jordan's own written testimony about the experience of guarding Miller had already confirmed everything that needed confirming. "I just want to beat his hands off because it's illegal," Jordan said. The greatest perimeter defender in basketball history, describing helplessness. That was Reggie Miller's most important professional achievement. Beyond the gamesmanship and the psychological warfare, what truly separated Miller from every other elite shooter of his generation was the physical punishment he imposed on defenders between every possession. He never stood still. Where other perimeter scorers rested on the weak side and waited for their moment, Miller dragged his defender through 2, 3, sometimes 4 hard screens per possession. Every possession for 40-plus minutes a night, across deep playoff series in June. The cardiovascular toll was deliberate and relentless. Most defenders were exhausted by the fourth quarter from the act of chasing him, and that was before he had caught a single pass. Future generations of off-ball scorers studied that template in detail. Richard Hamilton said it plainly in 2014. "Reggie Miller is a guy I stole a lot of tricks from and added it on my game. It didn't pay no commission on it, but he was one of the guys I really looked up to growing up." When Miller played his final NBA game, 27 points in an Eastern Conference semifinals loss to the Detroit Pistons on May 19, 2005, with Hamilton scoring 28 on the other side, the two shared an embrace afterward. Miller told him to carry the torch. It was the closest thing to a formal transfer of the blueprint. Kobe Bryant received an earlier version. Miller recalled in multiple interviews that he had shown Kobe his step-back jumper during an off-season workout. Then watched Kobe deploy that same move against Indiana in the 2000 NBA Finals, the series where the Pacers finally reached the championship stage for the first and only time in franchise history, and lost to the Lakers 4-2. Miller averaged 24, 3 points per game in that series, competing until the final possession of the final game, on a stage he had worked 18 years to reach. They didn't win, but the man who had driven Michael Jordan to open frustration, who had goaded John Starks into a headbutt, who had dropped 8 points in 9 seconds while an entire arena was already celebrating the other team, did not need a ring to define the fear he had installed in every defender who ever drew his name on the scouting report. Reggie Miller retired after the 2004-05 season with 25,279 career points, an 888 free throw percentage, and 2,560 career three-pointers, enough to make him the all-time leader in that category the day he walked off the floor. He spent all 18 seasons in one city, with one franchise. He never won a championship, never averaged 30 points in a single season, and never asked anyone to hand him the title of best shooter alive. What he did instead was force every great player of his generation to admit, publicly or through clenched teeth, that he was the hardest offensive player they had ever tried to stop. Jordan said it in print. Ewing said he hated him. Hamilton said he stole from him. The Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame said it in 2012 when they opened the door and let him in. The driveway in Riverside produced something no scout ever projected. A man whose most dangerous skill was never the shot itself, but the relentless, exhausting, infuriating way he made you believe you could stop it, and then proved you wrong.